an introduction. We know her from our cinema. She's one of our most celebrated actors. But she's somebody I admire for a different reason, in addition to her star power and her talent. She decided to go public with a deeply personal and intimate story on her own struggle with depression. In fact, in a 1-hour nationally televised interview with me. And then wanted to follow it up with concrete action, so actually created a foundation to help others who grapple with the same issues. And we also have here Dr. Murali Doraiswamy, one of the foremost neuroscientists and doctors from the United States of America, who spent a long time researching the science of the why, what, and how of depression and mental health issues. Deepika, once again, I must compliment you on your courage, because it does take courage, and it takes courage for somebody like you, even more than all of us in this room, to talk about our struggles, because you're in the public gaze. There are 100 things that will be said, that have been said, including really low-level things like, oh, she's probably just doing this to promote her next film, right? And I know, because I was in that conversation with you when you broke your silence on this on television, how difficult it was for you, how painful, how raw when you talk about it. And therefore, I'm going to say sorry, because I am going to, in a sense, put you through that moment again, because there are people in this room who may not be familiar with your own story. So let me start by asking you, when did you know that you were depressed? When did you start calling it depressed? And why did you, this fantastical woman on our screens, decide to go public with something so personal?
I think it started with just a feeling. It started with just a feeling of not being completely there, of feeling like, like we spoke about, that pittish feeling in your stomach where, and just breaking down for no reason. And truly just feeling completely lost and not understanding what was happening to me. And I think it was the intervention of my mother, who was visiting me at that time. And I think I lived with it for a while, actually. I was filming a movie at that time, and I had no idea what I was going through. And I'd go to work every day. I'd literally have to pull myself out of bed and go to work. And my mother just happened to visit me, completely different context. And the day she was leaving, I remember breaking down. And I was extremely surprised, actually, today when I think back at how aware she was of what I was going through. And the first thing she did was to call a family friend, and Anna Chandy, who's a counselor. But today when I think back, and of course I was hesitant at that point because I wasn't aware of what I was going through. And at the same time, for me, Anna is someone who's also a family friend. So I think that's where I sought comfort. But at the same time, I don't know if I would have done the same thing if I didn't have, sort of that comfort level. But it was my mother who really sort of identified the symptoms and immediately called her up. And in one phone conversation with Anna, she sort of understood what I was going through. But at the same time, I think it's the way she dealt with me and with the situation at that point. She didn't raise any alarms. She made me feel like it was completely normal and okay, and that we will get through this. And then, of course, with her and Dr. Shyam Bhatt, who, have worked on me, so I think initially I was also reluctant to take medication. But I think at one point I was just extremely exhausted. I couldn't do it anymore. And I think that's when I decided to sort of, I said, okay, let me start medication. Let me accept this help that people are willing to give me. And today there's a lot more awareness. I don't think I can say that I'm completely over it, but it's always a fear at the back of my mind that I might always have a relapse because it's been such a bad experience for me.
What was the most, I mean, I remember you telling me that you felt that pit in your stomach, you felt empty, you felt directionless,
Yeah.
that you would lock yourself in your vanity van and sometimes just cry, and you did not know why you were crying. That sometimes it helped to have people around, but sometimes it was the exact opposite. You know, that sense of being closed in by a crowd when you're feeling isolated within yourself.
Yeah. It helped having people I was close to and familiar with. It was comforting to have them around, because then I could break down if I felt like, and if I had questions or thoughts in my head, I wouldn't hesitate to ask. But at the same time, if I was in front of the media or at an event, which happened many, many times, that's when I'd feel a bit suffocated, because I didn't want to break down in public. And this is before I made up my mind to go public with what I was dealing with. Today, if that happens to me, if I ever go back to that space, and I hope I don't, I don't think I'd think twice about exposing the way I feel. And I think a large part of one's road to recovery is to accept what you're going through, and to not challenge it, but to embrace it. And to actually allow your body and your mind to go through that experience and know that there is a road ahead that will get you out of all of this. And it's not an individual, I don't think I could have done it on my own. I think it's very important to have that support system. So while, people credit me for coming out and speaking out, I think it's equally important for caregivers to acknowledge, and for us to acknowledge, that it's important for them to be with us on this journey.
Now, before I get Dr. Duraiswamy in, I want you to talk a little bit about the continued stigma. The continued stigma associated with mental health issues, with depression in particular. Even today, if I were to be honest, in terms of eliciting responses here, even in this room with very educated, very aware people, in drawing rooms you will hear loose and idle chatter saying, oh, why is Deepika depressed? She has everything. She has money. She's fame. She has talent. She's going places. She's, depression is treated as a indulgence. Like, only people who have no real problems are depressed. So when you came out in that conversation and millions of people saw it online, on television, read about it, were you worried that the people were going to be horribly mean? And were some people horribly mean?
No. I don't think anyone was mean, but I didn't even think about it. I didn't think about the repercussions. I think
you didn't have a moment of how will this impact my public image?
No, not at all. I think for me, the idea really was to just change the way people in India and in the world look at mental illness, and, give it the respect that it needs. I think the idea really was to just change the conversation, because I had experienced like literally a pre and post. And I lived with it for a couple of months without sharing it with anyone. And then today I feel so much lighter and so much better when I've come out and I've spoken about my journey. And I know a lot of other people who do. There's not a single day where I've probably not met someone who has come up to me and said, thank you for sharing the story. But what's also helped them is the fact that they've then shared their story with someone saying, I know what Deepika's been through because I'm going through the exact same thing, and they instantly feel a lot lighter.
What was the toughest thing about that phase of your life? Was it feeling like nobody's going to understand? Was it the sense of losing control? Was it the sense of, surrendering almost? Like you almost have to surrender to it before you can get better. You can't fight it. A lot of people think it's mind over matter, but actually depression is matter of a kind, and I'm going to talk to the doc about it in a second. But what was the toughest thing about that phase of your life?
The phase itself. I think before the intervention, I think before I understood, before my mother saw it, before anyone else saw it, to have to wake up every morning, to drag myself to work, to put on this face like everything's okay, when deep down inside I had no reason why I was where I was and what I was doing. And life just, it felt like there was no purpose. I didn't feel like it made absolutely no sense. Just life made no sense. So for me, I think that was the toughest part.
And Murli, that can be staggeringly lonely. What, the thing about depression is this kind of chicken and egg thing, right? You're already feeling like shit inside. You're feeling what Deepika calls that pit in your stomach. And then you feel like if you share it, she was, I think, in a way lucky because she had this really supportive family. She had this broader support structure in terms of a family friend who was a trained counselor,
Yeah.
Shyam Bhatt, a wonderful doctor. But most people are embarrassed about being depressed. Most of us are just plain embarrassed because we think we'll be judged.
That's right.
Even though 36% of this country, according to the World Health Organization, is depressed.
Yeah. So it's very well said. And first of all, I commend you on coming out. I think it's a transforming moment in India in terms of mental health and the attitudes, and we need more champions like you. And I can't imagine a better champion than you. So
Thank you.
I want to point a few things about statistics that you alluded to. Depression and mental disorders are now the leading cause of disability in the world. And they are soon going to become the number 2 cause of death in the next 10 years or so. In India, something like 150 million people have mental disorders, and especially amongst youth. The average age of depression in India is 30. Women are twice as likely to have it as men.
Yeah.
And amongst youth, which is sort of defined as people under the age of 25, I think in the previous session, Karan said that roughly half of India's population is under the age of 25, and our country depends on them for all of the accomplishments it's going to make. There is one suicide every hour in that age bracket, making India maybe one of the leading suicide countries.
Yeah, it is the highest number of suicides
age bracket.
Between 18 and 29.
That's right. And all of the symptoms that Deepika described are classic symptoms of depression. There is an enormous treatment gap. It takes on average between 1 to 2 years for the average person with mental illness to even be sort of recognized that they have the symptoms to seek help. And we have something like a 10 to 30-fold shortage of mental health professionals in this country. So even if somebody recognizes that they need help, it's very hard for someone living in the rural areas or someone who's poor coming from sort of the marginalized sections of society to find the right care and treatment.
Can you speak to exactly on that? Can you
Yeah.
speak to why then depression is not treated as seriously? As another illness which is more physically identifiable, maybe. Like one of the things that Deepika mentioned was that she resisted medication. Now that is a very, very, common response. I mean, I remember I used to get anxiety attacks, and when my doctor told me, you need to go on medication, I said, no, I don't want medications, messing with my brain. Now, this is a standard response, and I was having this response as an educated, aware journalist, right? So what intrigues me about the battle against depression is we are not able to cross that collective psychological barrier where even everybody sitting around me, the first instinct is this happens to other people. Hey, why would I be depressed? This happens to other people.
Yeah. So I think Tipper Gore, Al Gore's wife, suffered from depression, and she described depression as the greatest stigma of the 21st century. There's 2 elements of that stigma. The stigma of depression is unlike the stigma of any other physical illness. One is there's a self-stigma.
Yeah.
You yourself feel bad and you think it's a weakness. And that sort of almost spreads to others around you, your family and your friends, and they don't want to talk about it, and they kind of hide the problem until they get burnt out themselves, and then you're forced to seek help. So it's a twofold, and depression affects the core of who we are as human beings, our emotions, or just our personality, our cognition, all of that, and that's, I think, explains why the stigma has been so great. And I think things like what Deepika's foundation is doing, education, is really the core of overcoming stigma, especially education at younger age groups. And I think PM Modi, in one of his radio addresses, said, very simple, expression rather than suppression. And I think Deepika, exactly, she has done that by talking about it, by spreading the word, by educating people, especially in the youth. That's the key, I think, to overcoming stigma.
I want to come to the science of it in a moment, but I want you to talk a little bit about 2 things. One, I remember you telling me that at that phase when you slipped into this depression without knowing necessarily that it was depression, you had lost a very close friend. And I remember you told me that, again, you thought, or you didn't know that this friend was depressed. And that if this friend could do this to him, in terms of not thinking his life was worth living. Just imagine how many other people around you might be living with that. So can you speak a little bit to how losing that friend maybe, in a sense, began your own journey of self-discovery of what you were going through? I'm not saying that was the cause of your depression.
Yeah.
I'm saying it probably helped you to uncover it.
Well, he was a friend of a friend, and for me, someone I had met socially many, many times. But I think that was when I decided to sort of speak up and to do something about it, because I was seeing so many people around me. Now that's just one instance. We wake up today, we read the papers every single day. There's a headline. And my heart aches because it's preventable. It's absolutely preventable. And I think a large part of also the stigma comes from the fact that in schools, we talk about physical education. We have physical education classes. I had physical education in my school. But we didn't have anything to talk about mental health. Not one session, not a class, it's not part of the curriculum. So I think if we included that in the curriculum and we introduce just the idea of the importance of mental health at a school level, there will be no stigma, because it's the same way as a child you're educating me about so many other things. So educate me about the importance of mental health the same way we talk about the importance of physical health. But yes, I think it was that one experience, but it was many other, of course my own experience, and then to see someone who I'd known for so many years, and like I said, you see it all around you, and I've been there, so it hurts to know that maybe in a matter of moments, or maybe some sort of intervention by friends or a family member, or maybe that moment could have passed and maybe things would have been very different today.
And we're actually talking about saving lives here. We're not talking about something self-indulgent. We're talking about suicide. We're talking about people who feel, and this happened to your friend or friend of a friend, but you yourself had reached that perilous point where you were like, I don't want to get out of bed and go through my day. This life doesn't make sense to me. And that is an isolating, and actually it's a very dangerous, I want to underline how dangerous that sentiment is.
It is. I think it's so important, having been there, I think it's so important to identify that moment in your life and to not fight it. It's so important to just accept, embrace, talk to somebody about it. I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong. I don't mind if it's wrong diagnosis. I don't mind if I feel like I'm depressed, but I actually go to a doctor and he feels, or a specialist feels, I'm not depressed. I'd rather be in that space than underestimate what I'm going through. When we have a fever, we don't think twice about, I'm not talking about medication necessarily, but when we have a fever, when we have a cold, when we don't hesitate to pick up the phone and talk to someone, or casually mention to someone that I'm feeling feverish today, my throat is aching today. So why don't we talk about how my mind is feeling? I'm not feeling well today. I'm physically fine, but my mind's not there. Why can't we talk about it the same way?
So why did you resist the medication? And the reason I'm pushing you on this is because I know Dr. Duraiswamy will bear me out on this. This is the most common. Even people who are able to bring themselves to a doctor and say, help me. There is a resistance. The mind, we treat our mind as something, we ourselves treat our mind as something different.
Yeah.
Like if somebody tells us we're diabetic and we need Januvia or insulin, we will take it. And we'll say we'll also exercise and we'll lose weight and we'll do all of that, but we'll take the medicine. But when it comes to mental health, we resist. Why did you resist medication at first?
I think it's the same stigma that we're talking about. It's the same
Exactly.
stigma. That what if I'm already not feeling great, and what if this thing messes with my mind even more? It's the it was just the stigma, nothing else. And the day I overcame that, I'm fine.